I'm very glad that we have a keynote speaker today, so I'm very happy to introduce you Simon Maupin. He's working at the University of Ghent and he can also tell you more about himself also. Simon?
So, good morning. I'm Simon. I work for the University Hospital of Ghent. I'm a mental health nurse from origin, but over the years I developed something else. Today we're going to talk about, there we are, co-design as a starting point. As a starting point for handling reluctance amongst nurses, amongst other healthcare professionals, and also co-design as intervention development. Last year I finished my PhD on the bedside handover. Does anybody know what a bedside handover is? No? Bedside handover is actually when nurses give a handover to the other nurse on the shift at the patient's bedside. So you do an information transfer in presence of the patient. But first, I'm going to tell you a story. This is the Bianchi Celeste 97, sorry. As you all know, Belgium is a cycling country, and we now have the Flanders Classics, which is the Ronde van Vlaanderen, and so on, and so on. But this bike was developed for Paris-Roubaix. Does anybody know what Paris-Roubaix is? There's some Flemish people here.
Yeah, cobblestones.
Cobblestones. It's full of cobblestones. It's a cycling tour, about 250 kilometers. 30% is cobblestones, and they call it the Hell of the North. Because there are two weather conditions in which they ride it. It's extremely dry or extremely wet. In both cases, cobblestones are a hell to ride on with a bike. But if it's extremely wet or if it's extremely dry, it's very, very difficult. And that's why Bianchi, which is an Italian brand, has asked in 1996 to their Canadian colleagues to develop a bike especially for Paris-Roubaix. The joke is that they call it a women's bike. You can see it. It's not a standard frame bike. It has two specially developed parts in it so it can get the tension of the cobblestones. They developed the bike. They thought it would win Paris-Roubaix. And I'm going to show you a little movie about what happened. This is Johan Museeuw. Johan Museeuw is called the Lion of Flanders. He was a doping addict as well, but let's forget about that. But he was one of the best riders we ever had. At that point in 1997, he rode behind a guy called André Schmil. He was also a Belgian, and I think he lost about 2 minutes at this point in the race. With his Bianchi, yes. So, there you go. This is what happened. He tossed away a bike of about 10,000 euros. He just threw it in the ditch, and he took a very classical standard bike from the car. So what happened? Anybody?
He won.
No.
You want
Didn't
to?
win. But what happened with the bike? Why was the bike fault? Why didn't the bike work?
You didn't test it before?
They didn't test it. Two,
I think-
it worked perfectly on the cobblestones, but it didn't work on the regular road. Does anybody have ever ridden a mountain bike on a regular road? You go, yeah? It doesn't work. And they didn't know it for one good reason. Why did the developers didn't know that the bike was not going to work? They didn't test it, but who didn't test it? The users didn't test it. And that was what happened with the bike. Because they didn't test it, they didn't have any veto on the bike, and they had to ride the bike. And they didn't win the race. So, that's in essence, in biking, that's the essence of co-design. I think you all know what co-design is. You have been here for a whole week learning about co-design. But co-design originally was derived from the UK, called the King's Funds, developed it. They actually made a toolkit for experience-based co-design, is how they call it, in which they made a trajectory with patients and healthcare workers to develop interventions together. I'm not going to go in deep on the essence of the story or how it works, but the essence of the story is that if you bring patients and family and healthcare workers together, step by step, you will form an intervention that works. There's only one big problem with the whole experience-based co-design kit. It's very expensive to buy, and secondly, it's very expensive as a hospital to actually use it and to do it, because you have to make time, you have to find the right people, and so on and so on. So in our study, we actually changed experience-based co-design. We made our co-design team of it, and we had 2 other colleagues in Flanders doing the same. And in the end, we actually talked to each other and have had our experience summarized in 9 starting points for co-design. What to change in co-design, and especially what is very important in co-design to retain during the co-design trajectory. But before we start, I would like to give you a small introduction about healthcare in Belgium and perhaps healthcare in general. In 1979, 1997, we saw the bike, and 20 years later, somebody in healthcare actually made the same suggestion. It's an editorial by Jan Dewing, who is specialized in patient-centeredness, and he wrote an editorial about, tell me, how do you define patient-centeredness? And what we notice is that patient-centeredness is often very oversimplified. If we talk to healthcare workers, if we talk about patient-centeredness, people talk about it with a simplicity which is not good. If you look at all the hospitals in Belgium, and you have these vision texts and their mission statements and so on, they all say, for us, the patient is the center of the hospital. I've been traveling in Belgium quite a lot. I visit most hospitals in Belgium, and there isn't one hospital in which the patient is at the center of the hospital. There are a lot of things at the center of the hospital, but it's often not the patient. They reduce it, mostly patient-centeredness is reduced to empathy, compassion, and acknowledging what we think are the values of patients. And it's very important that I say what we think are the values of patients, because we actually have a wrong perception of what patients find important. And it's a very important question to ask the patient to tell us what they think is important, but there's something more important than asking the patient. Does anybody know what is more important than asking the patient what is important? Pardon?
Listening to what they tell you. Listening to what they tell you.
There's something even more important about that.
How do you feel?
No. It's actually answering the question. If you look at hospitals in Belgium, patients have 3 major complaints about hospitals. They're very standard. I think they're the same in the entire world. Anybody has any idea what the 3 main complaints are in hospitals in Belgium?
There was a lack of concrete information.
Yes, that's one. No information whatsoever. Second,
Distance.
not distance.
Not enough family participation.
No, no.
They didn't get involved in the treatment.
No, that's a step too far. It's about food. It's food. Food is a big difficult thing. It's a difficult thing in Belgium. We have Sodexo in our university hospital, and I can assure you I never eat in the hospital. It's not good. Yeah? There's a second one. It's not distance, but it's related to distance. Everybody who's ever been into a big hospital knows what I'm talking
The
about.
patient is feeling alone.
He's feeling alone, can't find his way around the hospital, major complaints. So what do hospitals do to solve that?
The routes.
Nothing. Very good. They do nothing. Yes, the routes. Did you ever follow the route in University Hospital? It's very complicated. I still don't use it. If patients ask me, I have to be at that route, I can't give them an answer because I don't know it, because we have about 1,700 routes. So it's very complicated to learn. So that's the essence of what he says about patient-centeredness. It's very important to ask our patient what matters to them, but it's very difficult to give them a genuine answer to that question, which we often don't do. So patient-centeredness is actually a culture. It's not an end goal. It's not something you reach at the end. It's a culture that everybody has to embrace in a hospital to achieve it. And why is it so important? It's important for this slide. Patient-centeredness is a culture which actually gives openness to get the patient to be empowered. This is a study of Eva Castro from Leuven, from Belgium, who actually defined the three major concepts that we are talking about today. It's patient participation, it's patient-centeredness, and finally, patient empowerment. As you can see, patient participation is actually the first step towards a patient-centered organization. But there's a big problem with patient participation. And the thing is that more often than we want to, is that in essence, we are all very paternalistic to our patients. And that's quite logical, because if you look at it, we always have more expertise than our patients. We always have more knowledge. If patients are admitted into a hospital, we know how a hospital works, we have the electronic patient files, we know the processes of the hospitals, we control the phones, we control the visiting hours. We always have more power than our patients. And what we often do is that we stress out the values that we think are important for patients, but that are not important for patients. So we stress out, let's for instance say religion. Religion is a big thing now in Belgium. We have a lot of religions living together. And often healthcare workers say religion is a very important value for patients. It's not. It's actually the least important value for patients. We think it's very important that the patient has the last word in any discussion. It's not. They want to discuss, but they don't want to take the final responsibility of taking a decision. They want to discuss and make a shared decision, not a unilateral decision. So what we see is that there is, and I said, unconscious tokenism, and I mean unconscious. Some healthcare workers do it very consciously, and some healthcare workers do it very unconsciously. I'm going to give you an example. My brother, he's a physician at the University Hospital, and he's specialized in the early detection of lung cancer. And when you are diagnosed with early lung cancer, there are 5 options that you can do. My brother is a good physician, but he's also a little bit paternalistic. So he gives them 2 options, the 2 best, and he doesn't discuss the other 3 ones. So is that patient participation? No, it's not. It's actually tokenism, because you make decisions for your patients. It's a fictive thing, because I see it's being reported, and otherwise my brother is going to be very mad. So it's tokenism. It's not through patient participation. So what is the definition of patient participation? As I said, it's a culture, and it's a culture that respects the values of personhood. That's what the individual patient wants, and the individual right to self-determination. And self-determination is very essential in this story. Self-determination means, in essence, that you get the full option, that you can get all options that you can have as a patient, and that you decide what is important and what is not. And it's about mutual respect. Mutual respect means equality. And that's the difficult thing, because as you remember, as a healthcare worker, you always have more power than your patients. And equality, it's not being equal, it's about equality. It's actually sharing your power as a healthcare worker. So, starting from those right values in our study, we thought, let's look a little bit, some critical appraisal towards ourselves, and we needed some introspection to actually get an intervention that was patient-centered. So that's where we started in the study. as I told you, we did the bedside handover. We studied it for over 4 years. Does it work? How does it work? And for who does it work? And why did we choose the bedside handover? 3 major reasons. 1, patient participation is getting important in hospitals. You're all students, so I hope that you get patient participation in your education. But it's becoming the essence of healthcare today. Since 2000, they actually made the shift of making patient participation an essential aspect of healthcare, which is quite strange. Does anybody know who Sackett was? He's the founder of the definitions of evidence-based medicine. And what is evidence-based medicine? Don't be shy. Does anybody can tell me what evidence-based medicine is, or evidence-based practice, or whatever? What do we mean with evidence-based?
They're tested.
Pardon?
They are tested.
Tested, yes.
Based on research.
Based on research, right? So we're research-like. Well, actually that's not true. That's the first part of the definition. Evidence-based medicine says that there are 3 things about evidence-based working.
Chances?
Pardon?
Chances?
Chances?
That you do something by accident.
I hope not, but
That's how
research is developed,
Yes.
yes. So we're still having the research part, but the definition of Sackett about evidence-based medicine actually says that there are 3 major issues in evidence-based medicine. Evidence, the classical idea about evidence. Research, chance, RCTs, so on. The second one is your experience as a healthcare worker. When I was a mental health nurse, we had this patient, I don't know the English word, but in Dutch it's een draaideurpatiënt. It means a patient that often returns to the hospital and then leaves again, and returns and leaves again. And at one point, we knew that the medication that that guy needs when he comes to the hospital is actually not standard nor evidence-based, but it works. What is standard evidence-based didn't work for him. So what we did was we used our experience as healthcare workers to treat him. And there's actually 1/3 issue in the evidence-based medicine of this. So we have research, your experience as a healthcare worker, but what is the final one? Patient preferences. Very important. Evidence-based medicine only works if you take into account patient preferences. The strange thing about that definition was that that definition was launched first time in '86. 86, that's the year that I was born. So that's more than 33 years ago. And in 2000, we finally realized that we needed to use the patient preferences in what we did. So there's an ethical point of view, but from the other hand side, patient participation is also evidence-based. If we get our patients involved in the decision-making process, it will actually work. My mother, she has a heart problem, and she likes to run. And at one point, the physician said to her, we're going to give you new medication. There's only one problem with that medication. You get muscle aches. A runner, muscle aches doesn't go together. So my mother said, I don't want to take that. Oh, it's the only option, you have to take it, and so on, and so on. There's one catch there. My father is a physician as well, so he says, well, there's more options than that. So my mother actually decided to take another medicine. It works less, but it's more related to how she lives, what her quality of life is. And what happened is that she actually takes the medication. It's like a small thing, but when she would get the other medication, she wouldn't take it anymore. It's one of the main reasons why most people with a psychotic problem start taking their medication, because there are too much side effects on that medication. If you would get the patient involved on deciding which side effects are doable and which are not, you probably have more patients actually taking their medication. The second one is that patient safety is a main thing in hospitals. And it's actually right so. A hospital is the most dangerous place to be in the world. It's more dangerous to be in a hospital than to go bungee jumping or jumping out of an airplane or whatever. It's estimated that in Australia, there are more people dying from communication errors in hospitals than in car accidents and breast cancer together. The average costs a year in the United States due to communication errors between patients and healthcare workers and healthcare workers and healthcare workers is estimated to be around $5 trillion. So that's a lot. So that's why we also chose the bedside handle. If you are going to give information to each other at the patient's bedside, information will more likely to be correct. And finally, we have financial sustainability. As you all know, well, in Belgium, it's true, is that our hospitals and our whole health system has enormous pressure to be financially sustainable. And what we did with bedside handover is actually doing tasks together, having a combination of tasks. And we think that people are going to get happy of doing bedside handover, which was not true at the end, but apart from that. So that were the main three reasons why we did the bedside handover. But there was one big problem with the study. That was this. Patient participation is very complex. It's not something that you were born with as a nurse. Most people think that nurses are born with empathy and patient participation. Most nurses are very people with a lot of empathy in the start of their professional career, when they start studying. The more they study, the less empathy they have. It's very strange, but a nurse from a first year in Belgium has more empathy than a nurse in a third year. You start getting professional. And being professional means creating a distance, knowing everything. Be professional for the patient. So we noticed in previous studies that patient participation is actually very complex for nurses. But the older they get and the more they study about patient participation, the easier it gets. But that means, because it's a complex intervention, that it's not that easy to get it implemented in practice. So we used a framework to implement it, and it's called the MRC framework. It's from the UK. It's the framework for the Medical Research Council. And that framework helped us to develop an intervention. And we're still not talking about co-design here. But we used co-design. And why did we use co-design? Two major reasons. One, we used it as an enabler. An enabler to get the reluctance of healthcare workers towards patient participation to downsize it. To actually make them open for patient participation. And secondly, because it was a complex intervention, we needed to develop an intervention that would work for healthcare workers and that would work for patients. I'm a little bit older than most of you, and I'm going to talk to the Flemish people for instance. Does anybody know the song Busje komt zo? I'm going to translate it. We had a song in, I think, in the end of the 90s, and it's called The Bus is Coming Soon. Most people don't know what the song is about. Well, the song is about a great Dutch idea. Well, they thought it was great. At one point, a lot of Dutch people had a heroin problem. It was the uprising of heroin in the 90s, and a Dutch minister of health decided to make a methadone bus. So it was a bus that drove around the country and distributed methadone. Yeah, that was the idea.
That song will never be the same for me.
You never realized it, but that's what the song is about. And what happened? What happened?
Small people get addicted to methadone.
Yes, perfect. They got addicted to methadone, and more importantly, they used methadone and heroin together. And if there's one thing that is very dangerous, is it using it together. So they actually got more deaths. And what they didn't do is what they had a great idea. Well, I think the minister had a great idea and said, I'm going to implement it, and I'm not going to check it with service users and their family. So again, that was what happened. So most things that we do in healthcare are actually very complex. We're not talking about an RCT, but most things that we do, we can't randomize. We can't make people blind for what we do and test it. So it's a very complex thing. And why is patient participation a very complex intervention? Two main reasons. You have to be educated to do it. And secondly, the older you get, the better you do it. The younger you are, the more difficult it is. You can see it here in this slide. There are actually two variables that are almost significant along the whole line. It's age and education. And you see supervisor, which is significant throughout the study. That's quite logical because most supervisors are older and are highly educated. But that made us think, why are age and education significant? And it comes back to this. This is the theory of Patricia Benner. It's again from the UK, I think, in which she describes how nurses evolve, or healthcare workers evolve throughout their career. We start as novices, and we work, in the end, we work as experts. It's about experience, and it's about education. And most young students that just finished their high school, or I don't know how it's called, their university, start as novices. And it's very essential. One thing is very essential about novice nurses is that they are very strict on rules. Very strict. They don't deviate from standards. They use standards as they are written. And it's actually, now it's getting enforced by, amongst others, the GCI accreditation. Does everybody know what GCI is? If you don't know it, GCI is an accreditation organization. They actually check the quality in hospitals, but they are very procedure oriented. It's not about the outcomes, it's very procedure oriented. Every pill has to be behind double lock. If you give the pills, you have to give them yourself, the patient has to push them out of the blisters, and so on and so on. So what you see is that we actually are organizing hospitals in a very procedure-oriented way. We're actually not learning anymore to deviate from procedures. And that is what expert nurses do best. They know what is essential in care, and they know where to deviate. And by doing that, they can actually provide care that is more customized to the patient. So, what is the MRC framework and why did we use it? The MRC framework has four main components in it. You have development, you have piloting, evaluation, and implementation. And this is where co-design comes in. Most interventions in healthcare are developed by healthcare workers. By you, by me, but not by the patients. Often patients are not involved in development of interventions at all. And that's a major difference in culture. What we say in our study is that we want to involve patients in what we do. And most of the time, we don't do it. And the main reason why we don't do it is because it costs time, it costs money, and it's very difficult to open yourself up as a healthcare professional. Because whether you like it or not, if you work together with patients, you have to be open. You have to be open about your mistakes, you have to be open about what doesn't work in healthcare, and you have to be open to their ideas. And we're actually trained to be professionals. And one of the main things about feeling professional is that you don't make any mistakes. So, development, there was co-design. We then piloted it, and again we went into a co-design trajectory with our patients. Because when you pilot something, you find out what's wrong about the intervention. And then we did the evaluation and the implementation, but that's not super important. So, this is what we did. We made it very, very simple. We did interviews with patients, and at the same time, we did interviews with healthcare workers. Interviews. Individual interviews. And we actually summarized the main themes from those interviews. And then we did what we call a focus group. We got everybody that we interviewed together, patients, healthcare workers separately, to actually discuss their ideas internally. We did, however, recorded quotes from both groups and showed them to each other. So we had healthcare workers saying about the bedside handover, oh, the patient, he's going to be too much involved, he's going to disrupt our whole handover process, and so on. And on the other hand side, we had patients that said during the interviews, yeah, well, we don't get any information in hospitals. So it was very confronting for both groups, but they weren't in the same room. So it was a very safe environment for both groups. Finally, we got everybody together. We did one big meeting, took about 3 hours for every hospital, to discuss the intervention that we were going to do, the bedside handover. And we did that for every ward included in the study, about 14 wards. So in the end, all our interventions were different. 80% of the interventions was similar, but 20% was customized based on the ideas of patients and the ideas of healthcare workers in the ward. And then we used them. That was it. What we found in our study is that our implementation success was higher than in other countries. We have some colleagues in Australia doing approximately the same research. They had a success rate of about 45%. Our success rate was 75%. And one of the main reasons, according to us, is that the fact that we used co-design. One of the main reasons why when it sometimes didn't work in Australia, because they did the bedside handover, but they didn't involve patients. And I can assure you, there is nothing stranger than being in a room with two people talking about you and not talking to you. It's like a very bad party. It doesn't empower you as a patient, and actually disempowers you. You feel small. So what happens when nurses do that, and you're the patient? After a while, you just say, you don't have to do it for me. Please do it outside of my room. So it's not successful. So co-design was essential of making our intervention work in practice. And why was it so essential? Let's look at some data. This is data that we're going to present the first time tomorrow, normally. So if the recordings can be the day after tomorrow, that would be perfect. But we asked patients and nurses to give us a prioritization about their values, what they think is important for patients. So we asked healthcare workers and we asked patients. These are the 12 most common values in healthcare. It's based on a study of Bastemeyer from Holland. And as you can see, we organized them. For healthcare practitioners, the top 3 values are religion, person-centeredness, and privacy. Privacy, very important in a hospital. Who's ever been admitted in a 2-person room? Yes. How much privacy do you have?
0.
0. Perfect. So for most patients, privacy is important, but it's not the most important value in healthcare. What they think are the most important values in healthcare is equivalency and getting information, honesty, very important honesty, and finally, possibilities. That are the most important values in healthcare. And honesty is a very strange thing. What you often see is that we do patient participation, but we don't say everything to the patient. We make choices not to say some stuff. Well, I'm going to give you a story about that. My son is becoming 5 this summer, and 5 years ago, I was in a maternity ward with a midwife, and the midwife says, oh, this is going to be a very, very, very easy. So I thought, perfect, no stress, everything is going fine. 13 hours later, I was still in the maternity. My wife was yelling very hard, and we had 1 physician, 3 midwives, one gynecologist and one pediatric physician in the room. And nobody told us that there was a problem. Everything is going to be fine. I am not an idiot. So it didn't give me a lot of confidence in the people in the room. On contraire, it gave me a very difficult idea. I'm not trying to say here that the father is the most important person during a delivery, but I am the only sane one. So my wife decided to give birth without any anesthesia. So she was not really sane at that point. She didn't have a lot of orientation in room or time, which is good, I think. But I did. And as a father, I didn't know what to do. So nobody gave me information. So I thought that honesty, very important. So you can see here that there is a difference between what we think patients find important and what patients actually find important. And that's actually the essence of co-design. Is that stopping thinking from your own perspective. And it's a very difficult thing to do because we're not used to it. To give you an example, 3 years ago, we decided in the university hospital to start a working group about patient participation. So we invited the CEO, we invited the quality staff, I was there, we had some researchers, and so on and so on. There was one person that we forgot to ask, the patient. Most hospitals, if you go and you give them the explanation about bedside handover, they ask us, but will our patients, will they want to participate in the bedside handover? Do they want it? And there's one simple reply to that. Ask your patients. It's something that we often not do anymore in hospitals. Because of the speed and the efficiency, we often think, most patients think that this is the best option, so we're going to do it over and over and over again. But patients change. Patients change a lot. And they have Google now. So that makes a difference. So, you see that we look at values from a totally different perspective. And what is more, even more dramatic is what you see here is we have two columns. This is what patients find important. So they could give a score from 1 to 5. And this is what healthcare workers actually said that they deliver. And the red cross means that they do not deliver as much as the patient wants. And the green arrows indicate values that we over-deliver. And again, what do we see? We see religion, family involvement, treating the patient as a unique individual, giving the patient the last word. We are sincerely involved and putting the patient at ease. And these things are all very tangible. It's something that we can measure, we can have a procedure for it. And that are the things that we focus on. We're not focusing on the values that are actually very important for patients. Honesty, information, and possibilities. Even more striking, you see privacy? It's very important in hospitals. We do a lot for privacy. Healthcare workers actually indicate that they do not deliver privacy. They say it's important, but we don't do it. And why are these things so important? They're tangible and they create tokenism. We put the patient in the center of our care because we take care of their religion. We give them the last word. We consider them to be unique. But they're not patient-centered because we're not putting the patient in control. We're not seeing the patient as a person that can decide. We are not doing shared decision-making. We are very judgmental when it comes to bad choices for patients. There's no equivalency in the relation. We're not honest, we're not providing enough information, and we're not giving possibilities. And those values are the essence of having your patient participate. And having your patient participate will create a culture of patient-centeredness and will, in the end, empower your patients. But what we do here is actually focusing on things that are not important, just to have the idea that our patient is in the center, but still we are in control of what happens in healthcare. So this is the essence of what I just told. If we want to have true patient participation, we have to share our power and responsibilities with patients. It is always a one-way process. Patients can't take power in hospitals. It is impossible. If you're in a bed or you're in a mental health ward, who holds the keys? I worked in a mental health ward, closed ward. So everything was closed. We had 20 beds. We didn't wear the white skirts anymore. We wore regular clothing like our patients. But the keys were a sign of power. You hold the keys, you open the door. It's power. So if we want to involve patients in care, we have to make the very conscious decision to share power, knowledge, and expertise with patients. And that is what you do when you do co-design. You open up and you give patients the power to actually change an intervention in healthcare. So, based on all the experiences we had in our study, we wrote a paper in Patient Medication and Counseling about 9 points of action that you can take when you're doing co-design. 9 things that you can change when you're doing co-design, and change for the better. So you don't have to use a very strict trajectory or buy the toolkit of the experience-based co-design, but there are some essential points that you have to take into account if you want to do it. What should you do when you are using co-design? The first thing is prepare it very well. And why should you prepare it very well? Again, people have to feel comfortable doing it. When we were bringing this story in most hospitals and saying to them, oh, we're going to do a co-design trajectory, most people look at us and they go, they're mad. Because it's not comfortable. It's very discomfortable for healthcare workers to sit at the same table with patients and actually have to listen to patients. It's strange, but it is. So make everybody very comfortable. And making people comfortable is information. Talk about how it's going to work, what you are planning to do, and actually provide a lot of information. If you get a lot of information, you start feeling comfortable. You can't underestimate the idea of being interviewed, filmed, recorded. I'm nervous as well. So it's a very exciting experience for most people. So inform them about that. And especially patients, because patients they not have learned it, but they are treated that way, to be quiet in hospitals. And it's not very strange, because patients who ask a lot of questions are often designated as difficult patients. And it's actually a scientific proof, there's actually scientific proof that patients who are labeled as difficult get lesser care. So patients, most of the time, take a very passive role in healthcare. So you make them comfortable, give them the purpose, so they can open up. You have to give them the word. You have to ask them, what would you change? How do you want to see things? If you don't ask it very explicitly, they won't do it at all. But there's one major drawback, and that is you can plan as much as you want, but you have to let go as well. You can't force patients to be part in a co-design trajectory. Because at that point, you're actually undoing everything that you are doing. Because forcing patients doesn't give them a choice. And choice is the essence of patient participation. So, that's the first one. The second one is recruitment. Very difficult. Recruitment is very difficult because it contains a major risk of bias. And bias means that you are going to select or going to look at things from a very narrow perspective. So you're not going around the ward and ask every patient, because not every patient is in the possibility to think and on an abstract level. If you're doing co-design, you have to think on an abstract level. If you get stuck in your own experiences, you can't provide a lot of information. You have to fall back on your own experiences, but you have to put it on a more abstract level. So you have to purposefully sample, which means that you have to choose patients that you're going to ask. And that is a major form of bias, because who is the main or the ideal person to choose patients from the ward is the physician and the head nurse. Because they know the patients. As a researcher or as a developer, you don't know the patients. They do know the patients. But the big risk is that they're going to choose patients that are going to talk in their advantage. And that's the one thing that you have to avoid in your story. When it comes to hospital staff, make it multidisciplinary, of course, but also have people that have an open but critical mindset. You don't want the physician who is still very paternalistic, who says that patients don't have to say anything, they just have to listen. It's not an ideal position in a co-design trajectory to actually have big discussions or fights. Discussions are okay, but especially fights. If you have very paternalistic healthcare workers at your side, it's going to be very difficult to have a good co-design trajectory. So choose wisely. Choose very wisely. And have somebody who is giving you some practical support. When we were doing the co-design trajectories, I was moderating the co-design groups. Should we take a break, 5 minutes?